Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Ordnance Survey. My name is Andrew Radcliffe. I'm currently the Head of Development for Ordnance Survey. I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with OS, but basically we are a part of UK government. We're a trading fund. We report through up to the Department of Biz, and we currently have about 1,200 members of staff. We are the UK's GB's National Mapping Authority. So the that we've been on so far, we started Agile about a couple of years ago. We looked at Scrum. We've adopted Scrum as our method. All of our development teams here are currently using that. And where Ordnance Survey is today in terms of the Agile journey is we're looking to scale Agile now out of the IT department into the far reaches of the organisation. So how do we take that successful 2-year project and how do we now apply it into legal and procurement and marketing and those other areas? Brian, I would like to hand over to now for probably a more in-depth introduction, but from me and Ordnance Survey, welcome.
I'm Brian Wynne. I'm Deputy Chair of the Governance SIG of the Association for Project Management. And a few months ago we decided that we were going to do something about Agile, because we've been doing a lot of work about governance, project management over the last 8 years that I've been a member of the Governance SIG. But then we thought that really Agile deserved some mention in terms of governance. So welcome to Sprint 4. And this is the plan for the evening. I'm going to give a very brief status report, and then Fiona Hayes from Ryan Initiatives is going to talk about Holacracy. Then we have a bit of a surprise. We have a specially filmed interview with the founder and inventor of Holacracy, Brian Robertson. He's recorded that for us kindly from the United States, and we're going to be playing that. 15-minute discussion between Fiona Hayes and Brian Robertson. And then myself and Fiona are going to have a little discussion at a whiteboard where I ask her a few questions. We get a bit more into a bit more detail. And then we break into a workshop, and we will get you to do some work and think up some questions, things that have occurred to you during the presentations that you don't feel fully satisfied with, you want some detail, you want to dig a bit deeper maybe. And then in the last half hour of the meeting, as we run up towards closing at 8 o'clock, then each workshop group can ask Fiona some questions, and she'll try and field them as best she can in terms of how Holacracy, Scrum, Agile and project management might fit together.
Okay, so I wanted to start with this little quote from Jeff Sutherland, which I quite like. And I think this is really where Holacracy has grown from, because the founder of Holacracy, who we're going to hear from later, Brian Robertson. This is Brian, and this is Tom. They're the two founders of Holacracy 1. And Brian actually ran an Agile software company and recognised that Agile worked exceptionally well for software development, but he actually wanted his whole company to be Agile. And so started to work with how could he develop an operating system for the whole organisation that would also be Agile. And of course, all of the problems that everybody finds with waterfall projects, etc., also get in the way when you're starting to look at how does this work in different departments such as HR, in sales, in all the other aspects of running a whole company, including how does the board behave with that and what are their Agile behaviours. And so he designed this whole process by developing it in his own company. So it was an emergent process in itself. He didn't just think it up and project it onto the company. It was an emergent process in developing it. And one of the things that came out quite strongly was that people's behaviour was not controlled by the leader. In fact, what it enabled was a distributive authority throughout the organisation where decisions were made at an appropriate level. Last sprint that you had, Sharon Constantine looked at the board as the radar of the ship, which holds the vision and sets the strategic direction. And detail is what the management do. And in fact, that's exactly the same with Holacracy, because the board is actually still the radar on the ship. The way that Holacracy works is there are units which are complete in their own right, which they call circles, which are also part of the greater whole. So the board actually sits on the edge. The greater whole that it is part of is the world at large, the commercial world at large. So the board is constantly sensing what's going on in the commercial world and setting the strategic direction for the company. From that perspective, it's no different to what to any other company and to what Sharon was describing. However, where it gets slightly different is where you have the general company circle here, which has inside it other circles. So you may have a sales circle in this particular Holacracy, you have a sales circle, you have an operations circle, and a development department. Now I picked out some of the development work that's going on in Ordnance Survey and said, well, within that development circle, you've got solutions engineering going on, and that could be a circle. You've got business systems engineering on, that could be a circle, and geospatial engineering going on, and that could be a circle. The difference is that each of those circles is a self-organizing team. So the way that it works is, this area here, which is the organization's purpose, is actually the pull factor. So whatever the organization's purpose is where the organization is going. And at the other side, you're getting stuff done. Now, for those of you that are used to Agile, that'll be very, very familiar. The difference is that when you start to get the stuff done, and you start to get the feedback from reality, you start to sense the tensions that are going on. A tension is basically a difference between where am I now and where do I want to be? What's the gap? So it may be that actually, in order to get this next Scrum done, we need something that we haven't got, and that would be a tension. We've got to go and find that something that we haven't got. Or it may be the tension is there that we can see that there is a greater opportunity that we're not fulfilling, and that's a tension, and we need to actually to voice that tension and say, okay, how do we bring that in? And that's actually what Brian has been describing in building this this whole series. And those, from a tactical perspective, are processed via tactical meetings, which lead to clear work, to projects, to actions, and they get executed. And that, in turn, comes back into, we've got stuff done, and that will lead to, and what next? What's the next tension? Where Agile didn't work, as Brian Robertson was putting this together, didn't work for his larger organisation, was that it was very, very good at small, tight projects, very good at software development. But in terms of then running an organisation as a whole, it didn't allow for changing of the rules if you needed to change the rules. It didn't allow for those things. So he started to bring in some other types of structures as well. So he brought in processed governance meetings, which give a clear structure in terms of distributed authority. So the governance is about the structure, whereas the tactical is about the work, but they're processed in a similar way that distributes the authority down to the right level within the organisation via those circles. So, let's get on to see what Brian has to say about all of this. Let's keep fingers crossed that this is going to work. So Brian, it's lovely to see you again. Long time since we spoke. Thank you very much for agreeing to help with this Agile Governance Guide development meeting. As I explained to you, the guide is very much aimed at the executive team, and in this particular Scrum session, we are looking very much at the Scrum product owners and how Holacracy will help them, or how it will differ from what they normally do, what effect it will have on the product owners, basically?
Instead of having one intelligence at the top trying to direct and command everything, you end up with everyone using their local intelligence. You're tapping more wisdom from more people,
Yeah.
right? You're allowing more people to use their judgment in their local environment because they know it best, right? And figure out what their needs are and what should flow to them from them. There's a signaling system with prices, but it's much more than just that. There's an emergent order, and we see that in our cities all the time. Yes, we have governments organizing some services, but the vast majority of what happens in a city is not from a top-down directed boss. It's actually in a state of anarchy. It has rules, but no rulers.
Uh-huh.
And I think what Holacracy brings into an organization is a lot of that same power. You have rules, but no rulers. And what that allows is everyone to use their local intelligence within a framework of rules. Just like in our cities, I know not to go steal my neighbor's car to meet my goals. There's boundaries and there's rules to abide by. But within that, I'm free to look at my local environment and adapt and use my knowledge, my wisdom, my experience. And I know what's mine to control and what isn't. And that's the framework of rules. When you bring that within an organization, you get an emergent order that looks a lot more like it does in our cities.
Can you also explain then the relationship between Agile and Holacracy? Because both, for instance, have self-organizing teams. So what is the difference about Holacracy?
Yeah, so just for historical context, Holacracy was developed in its early days in an Agile software development firm. So it kind of grew out of Agile in its fundamental birthing. And actually, it grew out of the search for, we did Agile in our software teams, but what do we do in the rest of the company? How do we broaden this and bring the same principles that we were experiencing from Agile to all aspects of our business, including to our Agile process itself? Because you look at something like Scrum, and it's a brilliant method, and every organization is a little bit different. And sometimes there's a need to adapt something to that context. What happens when you want your product owner to do something a little bit different because you happen to be in business X and have some special need? Or you want your developers to focus on something that Scrum doesn't provide because it's unique to your situation. So the irony of most implementations of Scrum or any Agile method is that they themselves are not very agile, right? That there's no easy systemized way to change the way we do Agile software development. So there's kind of a meta layer there that isn't provided by an Agile method, and that's what Holacracy does. It's not telling you how to run your software team. That's not its job. It's rather telling you how to figure out how to run your software team and how to evolve that to adapt to your local context.
In Scrum, the product owner, who normally would make all the business decisions in the Scrum team, and is effectively the final arbiter of all of the requirements. How is Holacracy similar and dissimilar, and how does it affect the product owner as well?
Holacracy doesn't tell you how to organize an Agile software team or any team. It just gives you the meta framework for you together to figure out how to do that and to let it evolve as your environment teaches you things. So, we have a software team in my company, and, we use at the beginning a pretty canned Agile approach. And now we've adapted it because we find in our context, there are certain decisions we don't want the product manager to make. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't go with their role. We want the freedom to assign somebody else who's better at that to it. So we carve out some decisions and we put it into another role that can be assigned to anyone. There are some things that the product manager does decide, they stay with that role. There's no prescription for that. But what we have now is a system to actually adapt. So when we discover, like, for example, we don't want our product manager to prioritize the order in which bugs get implemented. We have a customer engagement role that's actually really close to our clients. And that role is actually a better fit. They're getting the feedback about what bugs are getting in the way. We want that role to prioritize bugs. Then we can adapt our process and allow that to happen. For us, that made sense. For another environment, that might be a terrible idea. Holacracy doesn't tell you, again, what to do. It just gives you the framework for allowing that evolution to happen, for trying different things, for learning from the results, and for adapting your structure.
Large projects and also small Agile projects can both run under Holacracy very easily.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the way I say it. Sometimes people ask me, can we adopt part of Holacracy? It's a big, thing to bite off. And the answer is no. You cannot adopt part of Holacracy, but you can adopt all of Holacracy and part of the company.
Uh-huh.
And the way I say it, it's like, if you just adopted one little rule from Scrum and left the others behind, you don't get Scrum.
Yeah.
At best, you get a micro improvement, but at worst, you actually do harm because Scrum is a whole system that all kind of fits together. And that's the way a lot of large companies start. Our largest case over here in the US is a pretty famous company for us called Zappos, and they didn't start in 1,500 employees, which is their size. They started in a 100-person department, and they adopted all of Holacracy in that department for about 6 months and used that as a pilot to get ready for it, to understand it, to make sure it was right for them. Then they pulled the trigger on spreading it to the 1,500. So, and that works fine.
Yeah, so it's basically piloting and phasing it in, which is actually what we're currently doing in the Russian company that I'm working with Deirdre in at the moment. And we are starting with a small 100-man team, and then hopefully we will be able to spread it out to the larger organisation later on. Well, we're about out of time, actually, Brian, but that's been extremely useful and extremely helpful to, I'm sure, to all of us as we now start to discuss where we go next with this Agile Governance Guide. So thank you very much. I would like to thank you.
Thank you. Happy to help and good luck.
Great. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I think we're on to our next piece of the puzzle with a discussion between the two of us now.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Fiona, for arranging this. So thank you very much, Fiona. We're going to split up into 4 groups, and we're going to ask Fiona a few questions. We want to get into the practical nitty-gritty at this stage. So I'm sure you've got some questions to ask. So we'll have Group A, B, C and D. I'll give you some numbers in a minute. So in Group A, there's this idea of the lead link, that is somebody in an owning circle telling the other circle what to do, or at least coordinating it. And how does that relate to a product owner, maybe? So we're thinking about how does Holacracy work with Scrum. So Fiona and I will walk around a bit and answer any of your questions, just so we can get some good stuff coming up that we can ask her during the next session. Group B, well, let's talk about the rep link. That's someone who's working for a circle and has to report back to a higher circle. Is that the same as a Scrum Master? Is Scrum? How do these different circles audit each other and assure each other? Maybe one circle's doing something but does need independent assurance and audit from a financial point of view, a regulatory point of view. How does Holacracy allow that to happen? And then Group D can ask any questions they want to about what we're doing in terms of agile governance, or what Holacracy is up to.
I'm Matt. I'm representing Ordnance Survey here. I'm a project manager, so that's why I'm interested in this Agile Governance SIG, and we work very much with the Agile development teams that we've got embedded here.
Group A.
Okay, so we looked at the lead link and had some questions relating to the role of the lead link, and inevitably it was, some of them were how they interacted with the rep link as well. But I suppose the first one was, does having those specific roles create potential for single points of failure?
Okay, so I think by that you're referring to, I just want to correct your little diagram, if I may. So what you've actually got here is the general larger circle, and this would be a smaller circle inside it. So I'm going to just redraw that larger circle around here, and you'd probably have more of these smaller circles inside. So your governance is held by the whole circle. So within this larger circle, the governance is held by that whole circle, and within this circle, the governance is held by that whole circle. So whilst your lead link and your rep link's role is not to govern that circle, the lead link's role is to represent this large circle inside this smaller circle, and the rep link's role is to represent this small circle inside this larger circle in those meetings. But the meetings that they hold themselves, especially the governance meetings, will actually decide how that governance is done.
I'd just like to thank Fiona and everyone here for working so hard on this. Thank you very much, Fiona. And just to wrap up, so the next meeting actually will be a webinar on September the 11th. That's lunchtime in the UK at 12:30. That's 07:30 EST USA. and some god-awful out on the Pacific coast. And we're going to have the NAO from the UK and the GAO from America, so that's the National Audit Office of the United Kingdom, and the Government Accountability Office of the United States, talking about governance for agile delivery in the central government in the UK and in the federal government in the United States. And that's a free online webinar for anyone to join in the world. I'll give you the link for that to click through on. And then back to London on September the 25th at Barclays in Canary Wharf. We've got the CEO of the largest project management examination body in the UK, that's Richard Farrow, spelt with P-H-A-R-R-O, Richard Farrow of APMG. He doles out all the certificates in project management, prints, and also agile project management as well. And he'll be talking about agile business cases. And we're lucky to have the chair of the DSDM consortium, Steve Messenger, joining us also at that meeting to talk about the new version of DSDM. It's just been released. There's a new manual that's just been released, and it's been repositioned to work as a framework around other more detailed agile methods such as Scrum, for example. So it's definitely worth hearing what he has to say, and we'll be videoing those as well and making those available on the internet. And then we have a schedule of further sprints as we go on and develop the guide. And hopefully by the end of 2014, we'll have a guide being drafted, and we then go into a stage where we're editing the guide and then releasing it sometime next year. Of course, we're being agile, so we don't really want to commit to a definite release date until we're ready and it's ready to use. And we'll be releasing it in potentially shippable increments, if you like, to those people like yourselves who are on the mailing list. You'll be able to get drafts of it. In fact, there is a draft there at the moment. It's in Google Docs, and I'll put the link for that as a subtitle to this video as well, so you can just click through and have a look at the Google Docs document. You can put comments in, change it around. In fact, anyone with a Google ID can go and just do that straight away and leave me notes and things. So it's very collaborative, very open. I was at the Wikipedia conference at the weekend. I was at Wikimania 2014, and I was lucky enough to be having a cup of coffee, and who came and had a cup of coffee right next to me but Jimmy Wales, who's the founder of Wikipedia. And we had a very brief chat, and I twisted his arm and said, it's got to be made easier to edit. I think Wikipedia is just absolutely fantastic. You can go in and correct things. It's so up to date, and quite often very accurate, where people are curating very well and there isn't too much of a political argy-bargy. But he said that he's got 100 new developers that Wikipedia has just taken on, and they're working on new user-orientated tools for editing Wikipedia as easily as you edit Microsoft Word, except everyone is editing the document at the same time in the whole world. That's 110 million pages of Wikipedia and growing. So on that bombshell, I leave you for the night. Thank you very much.